In our last episode, we were looking at some principles in discovering the original meaning of a biblical passage. The Bible, as with all human literature, is a written form of communication, and so we need to consider some of the basic challenges inherent in written human communication. Understanding this will help us in our biblical interpretation. Does affirming the authority of Scripture mean that every passage is to be interpreted literally?
Welcome to our Leadership Matters Series, The Written Word. In this series, we are going to discuss some of the principles that are helpful in better understanding and applying the truth of the Bible in our lives. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete workbook. You can also access any of our other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
Understanding the basic process of communication is essential for accurate Bible reading and study. In all communication, there is both a sender and a receiver, which includes various stages of communication. We won't get into great detail at this point, other than to say that God was the sender through the human transmitters, and we, the readers, are the receivers. Our task is to make sure we understand the human author's intended meaning. That is the essential task of Bible reading and interpretation. Yet with all communication, there are inherent challenges in doing this. As we have seen, we don't get to invent general rules of interpretation. But these principles are not arbitrary, but are inherent in who we are as humans and the communication process. Since the Bible is like other books and written in normal human language, there are common sense guidelines for understanding its meaning. McQuilkin suggests that such basic guidelines in understanding human communication. We must begin with the ordinary meaning of the language, as well as identify the type of language used. Is it poetry, prose, figurative, or literal? As with all communication, biblical interpretation involves seeking a single meaning from what the writer or speaker is saying. Does believing that the Bible is authoritative mean that we take every passage literally? This is the challenge of biblical interpretation, isn't it? But let's begin with the basic human communication principles. The first of these is that all human communication, we assume that the sender had a central meaning to convey. Perhaps the real issue for the skeptic is if the Bible is trustworthy, not if it is literal. Are those problematic passages that we are to take literally actually true? But as with all communication, we have to be aware of if the intended meaning was poetic or figurative, not if it was just true or false. This is the case for much of the humor in English. I recently heard a story where a New York Times newspaper quoted an online satirical website literally, not realizing that the whole website was a satire. Totally changed the meaning. Understanding the intent is huge when it comes to understanding the original author. We do this in our daily life without thinking, don't we? This is why I will also be spending several episodes looking at the different genre or types of literature in the Bible. Knowing this is crucial in how we interpret and understanding the Scriptures. Is the passage literal or figurative? Some obvious examples may help. From Matthew 3:5 in the King James, did the city of Jerusalem, the actual city, and Judea geographically move to literally go to hear John the Baptist? Likely not. As the NIV clarifies, this is an obvious figurative expression that means that the many people from Jerusalem went into the wilderness to hear John. Was it a true statement? Yes, but it has to be interpreted figuratively since it was a figurative language. While we do this in our everyday life and understand the meaning of others, and of course satire and comedy shows included, when it comes to Scripture, we may need to learn a bit about the types of literature used that may not be as common to us today. We have to do that in order to discover its real meaning. While the passage may be true, trustworthy, it may be intended to be understood figuratively. On the other hand, we can make the same mistake of regarding a literal passage and interpreting it figuratively or even as a myth, as with creation or the resurrection. Just like in our today communication, it is possible to distort someone's meaning to make it say whatever we want it to. This is also true when we read our Bibles. We can over-spiritualize some passages or take them metaphorically. All that to say that communication has its challenges, even when we have pure motives. Half of Christendom, for example, take the words of Jesus in Matthew 26:26, that this is my body, as literal, and have built a major doctrine on it, while others see this as metaphorical. So it would seem we need some basic guidelines that will help us identify the type of language being used and understand the meaning of that particular language. See, with most communication, we seek to identify a singular meaning. This is the only way we as humans can function and know what each other means when we talk. So while there is typically a singular meaning, just like in our everyday life, I'm not saying that there is never a secondary or deeper meaning. We use this communication technique all the time, and in English it takes the form of humor, idioms, or euphemisms. But for this type of communication to occur, it has to be intended by the original speaker or author. We are not free after the fact to put this additional meaning on the author's words that they never intended. Otherwise, accurate communication would become impossible. It is the same with reading the Bible. In order to be dogmatic about a second or deeper meaning, it had to be in the mind of the original author. How will applying the principles of differentiating between what is literal or figurative impact your own Bible study? We see this with biblical prophecy, as biblical writers in the New Testament infused the Old Testament text with additional meaning. The question is this: since we have the Holy Spirit living within each of us, can we also do this to scriptures today? There are good and well-meaning interpreters and scholars on both sides of the argument. But as we have already discussed, we have to be careful if we are to have no guidelines. The scriptures can really be taken to mean anything we want them to. History is full of such examples. We then become the authority of what the meaning is, rather than the Bible being the authority. See, I would suggest that our main goal as a reader of Scripture is to come to the singular meaning of the passage, and then follow guidelines in dealing with possible exceptions. Saying that there is one meaning does not imply that all interpreters agree on that meaning, or that the meaning is easily understood in every passage. For example, even among those who agree that the creation account in Genesis is an authoritative revelation of historical truth, there are several interpretations. In some cases, we may have to accept that there are several possible interpretations without wavering in our commitment to the authority of Scripture. This does not mean that all interpretations are equally valid, of course, but we have to come to the text with humility and not dogmatically build our doctrine or theology on passages that are intended or inherently unclear. See, the Scriptures provide all we need for life and godliness, but not always all we need to satisfy our curiosity. However, a passage having a singular meaning does not mean that there is only a singular application. For example, Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself, has a clear meaning, but can be applied in many ways in various circumstances. After doing our exegesis, or coming to the central meaning of the original text, we need to then look at various guidelines that can help us determine the application for us today. We'll discuss this in our next couple episodes. We are trying to not invent or arrive at a deeper meaning, but understand the basic meaning of the passage. And none of us will ever live long enough to exhaust the central meaning of every passage in the Scriptures, so there's no need for us to go on literary expedition trips to come up with some deeper meaning. Why do you think it is so important to not try to squeeze a deeper hitting meaning from every text?
For this series, we are providing some free resources, which include a Bible study worksheet, 2 different Bible reading plans, as well as a chart describing the various genres of Scripture. To download these, click the links in the description box below. You can also view any of Phil's other podcast series at icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing the Race, Multicultural Teams, and the Fivefold Ministry. If you are interested in a more comprehensive leadership training program, check out our Christian Leadership Institute at mcnetcli.org. This is a unique online competency-based ministerial training based on a mentoring relationship. For other leadership resources, please visit our library at icmcanada.org/resources.
In wrapping up this episode, let me provide a quick review of the main guidelines in arriving at the main meaning of the text. See, the Bible is unique among holy books as it is a divine revelation that is based in an historic document rather than in a mythological or wise sayings. This is why it is so crucial to know the historical setting in order to come to the meaning of the text. See, this begins with understanding the historical context of the original author. Knowing Paul was in prison when he wrote, "Rejoice always," provides context and meaning to the passage. Rejoicing is not just an activity when our circumstances are going well. Often the historical context can be found in the text itself. This is why understanding Old Testament history is essential in understanding much of the New Testament, as well as other Old Testament passages. Similarly, understanding New Testament history is helpful in understanding New Testament passages. See, a good study Bible, a Bible concordance, maybe a Bible dictionary or encyclopedia can really be useful tools in this regard. So understanding the geographic setting is also helpful in understanding the passage. For example, understanding the layout of Israel and the location of the tribes, or the scope of Jesus' travel in the gospel, and the layout of the Mediterranean world for Paul's missionary journeys. See, the cultural setting is important to understanding the text. These were people living in different times with different values, and so we need to understand their context if we're going to gain the full impact of what the author of the text was trying to say. This is important in understanding Jesus' parable of the wedding guests in Matthew 22:11, and the trick question of what to render to Caesars in Matthew 22:21. Some of this can be gleaned from the scripture itself and a good study Bible. There are also other books on biblical cultural issues that may be useful. While some of this is also available in the introduction to a book in a commentary, let me here make a few comments regarding commentaries themselves. See, it's important to remember that no commentator is infallible, and each author, yours truly included, has their own experiences and biases. In choosing a commentary, choose one that is based on the original biblical languages, which is based on an exegetical approach. Does it discuss textual problems and provide historical context? Does the commentary discuss all possible meanings, or does it have an axe to grind? Instead of relying on commentaries, I would suggest that they're best consulted after we do our own study. How will understanding the setting of the passage help you in your own Bible reading and study? Let me make just a few more comments regarding literary context. Passages always begin with words, but sometimes their meanings are not always obvious, and they seldom have precise meanings in all contexts. They can have a range of meaning. In our own language, this is often a challenge and is more so with translations. See, this range of meaning does not mean, however, that we cannot know what the range is and pick a meaning that fits that context. Again, something we regularly do in our daily life. Of course, there are specific biblical words that we need to know the meaning. There are technical ones such as justification, figurative ones such as death, or multi-layered ones such as sin. Understanding the range of meaning for the Greek words for love, of course, is essential in understanding many biblical texts. It's not necessary to know the original languages in order to do a word study. There are many interlinear Greek, Hebrew, English tools that can help you do this task. And comparing the occurrence of the word in all the scripture with a concordance is usually deep enough for most Bible readers. I like a concordance like Young's that organizes the passages according to the word in the original language. So as an overview, we first begin with an immediate context of the word, then compare with other occurrences in the same book, and then in the writings by the same author. By looking at the occurrences of the word by other authors, including any Old Testament root concepts of New Testament words, we can usually come to the meaning of any words that we don't understand. Now, words are arranged in phrases and in sentences, so our next task is to determine the basic thought structure. This includes the sentences as well as the context. Again, there are many resources to help do this, and so I'll not go into the great detail here, but just provide more of an overview. This can be a challenge as the meaning is in the flow in the original language, not necessarily the flow in our contemporary modern language. Some translations are better at doing this than others. And this can be a bit of a challenge even with modern languages, as English sentences are not structured the same as, say, German or Russian, for example. If you've ever been involved in a translation project, you know the challenges that this presents. Similarly, Greek and Hebrew have different sentence structures than our modern languages. In most cases, we have to rely on a good translation, but be aware of the problematic passages. Some are more literal to the original, such as the NSB or the RSV, which also makes them not flow as well. On the other extreme, paraphrases such as the NEB and the Message take greater freedom to translate the meaning into modern language. Now, dynamic equivalent translations such as NIV attempt to balance these two extremes. They are more accurate to the original than a paraphrase and usually flow better than a purely literal translation. For those in other countries and other languages, you also have to be aware of the different approaches of the available translations in your language. Now, in determining the flow of the thought of the author, we need to consider what or who is the main subject of the thought. This is usually in the form of the noun. The verb then indicates the action that the subject must do. Then, who is the object of the action? Next, we need to determine what parts of the thought have been modified by a word or phrase, and what are the relationships between the various parts of the thought. Finally, how does the key thought or idea relate to the ones before and after it? Okay, if I lost you a bit there, don't panic. As we will see in our next episode, this is not quite as difficult as it sounds. But in terms of the context of the thought itself, where it is placed in the passage and where the passage is placed in the book is important for its meaning. The most important of these is the immediate context, which is the meaning of the passage immediately preceding and following the passage. It is also helpful to discover the purpose of the book of the Bible. Some explicitly state this, as with John's Gospel. Others may have key statements or patterns that indicate the author's purpose. This is particularly important in the epistles, which are called occasional literature, meaning that they're written for a specific occasion or purpose. They are like a letter, and the meaning of the words and passages are determined by the reason for which they were written and to whom they were written. The plan or how the book was organized is also an important context to consider. Some, like Proverbs, are a collection of sayings and no real overall plan, while narratives are arranged in chronological order and the Gospels somewhat topically. See, the plan of the book influences interpretation. The systematic way that Paul arranged Romans gives meaning to its various elements. One way to better understand the book is to outline it. Remember that chapters and verses are not a good way to outline the thoughts, as they were placed rather arbitrary, often segmenting thoughts. Once you have done this, you can always go to a commentary or Bible introductory resources to compare with other outlines. How will better understanding the literary context and flow of thought help you in your own Bible study and reading? Now, in the last two episodes, we've been studying elements of the first task of interpretation, which is to discover the original meaning of the text, the fancy word being exegesis. In the next couple episodes, we will begin to look at the process of hermeneutics, or how do we arrive at what the text means for us today. I hope you'll be able to continue as we continue to connect the dots in our study.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like any of the resources or your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, icmcanada.org/resources.